There are places in the American Southwest where language feels inadequate, where the act of naming seems like an interruption. Far down in southern Utah, just past the familiar outposts and guided trails, the land begins to forget where it's supposed to end. This place is called the Maze, not in metaphor. That is its literal name, the Maze District. A geological snarl of stone and shadow tucked into the farthest reaches of Canyonlands National Park. Cliff walls rise and break like fossilized waves. Passages narrow into disorienting slots of wind-blasted sandstone. No marked trails, no roads, and once you're in, no reliable way to know how far you've been drawn. Even experienced hikers say it challenges your sense of distance, like the horizon keeps blinking. It is not, on paper, a cursed place. There's no bloody history carved into its ledges, no record of mass vanishings or ancient rituals etched on stone. But over the decades, patterns have emerged. Not enough to alarm the federal databases, but enough for rangers to notice. Enough for locals to start changing the subject when outsiders ask for maps. Because here, in this deeply folded wilderness, paths don't just lead you places. Sometimes, they watch where you've been. In April of 2002, four people walked into the maze. Ivan Keller was a 38-year-old geology hobbyist from Colorado Springs. Confident, curious, respectful of wilderness, but not sentimental about it. He'd been inside the more accessible zones of the park before, but this was his first multi-day attempt into the segmented valleys of the maze itself. He brought with him his younger sister Wren, 29, thoughtful, kept a small cassette voice journal. She wasn't new to backpacking, but relied on Ivan's planning. The other two were friends of Wren's. Paul Ames, a quiet endurance runner with a mind for logistics, and Jessica Lowe, who worked as a librarian in Salt Lake and was known for meticulously sketching their nightly camps in charcoal. They were well-equipped: topo maps, dual GPS trackers, backup radios, water tablets, signal flares. Ivan had checked the weather service a dozen times. Clear skies, low wind, no heat waves expected. They timed their entry for mid-April, early enough to beat the desert heat, late enough to avoid flash flood season. The plan was a 5-day loop that would take them down from Hans Flat into Horse Canyon, swing past an area known as the Fins, and exit near Chimney Rock. It was not a beginner's route, but they weren't beginners. At the ranger station that morning, they checked in with the logbook, passed the permit to the on-duty ranger, an older man named Nolan Reese, and briefly asked about trail conditions. Reese glanced at their gear, saw that they were prepared, and gave the standard cautions. Flash floods, sunstroke, loose footing. But as they turned to leave, he hesitated, then said something Ivan would later write down at the top of his trail journal. If you lose the trail, count out loud. Not steps, just numbers. Some people say it helps them stay straight. There was a pause. Paul laughed. Superstition. The ranger only shrugged. It's old advice. Might keep rhythm. Might do more than that. Ivan nodded politely, then stepped off the porch. He would write later that he thought it was just poetic nonsense. They adjusted their packs and vanished into the sandstone ribs of the maze. The first day went smoothly. They descended into the shallow arms of South Fork Canyon, setting a modest pace, 6 miles before noon. Ivan navigated by a mix of paper maps and preloaded GPS routes. Jessica snapped photos of the waypoints. Paul marked subtle stacks of twigs along their exit path. If the canyons were closing in, they did so slowly. The sky stayed clear. The light filtered down in fractured gold along the rock walls. Birds occasionally rode air currents overhead, hawks most likely, circling in wide arcs. At camp that night, they set up their sleeping bags beneath a natural alcove near a bent cottonwood. No fire, just headlamps and water boiling over a pocket stove. Wren made her first voice memo. April 17th. First day went well. No real surprises. Everyone in good form. But there's this strange way the sound travels here. You hear things, but they aren't where you thought. Like echoes remember different directions. Sometime that evening, while gathering dry brush for cooking, Wren noticed something slightly out of place. A thin strip of red fabric, tied around a juniper branch low to the ground. The wind didn't move it. It hung limp, like something drawn in and forgotten. She called Jessica over, who shrugged it off. Probably left by another hiker. Ivan thought it might be part of an old route marker. Still, for something old, it hadn't faded. The color looked recent, unsettling in its clarity against the stone. They didn't touch it. They didn't take it. They just moved on. What's important to know about the maze is that it doesn't rely on malice to mislead. It only asks one thing: that you believe you're still oriented, that you're still following the map you carried in with you. Because once you start trusting your own trail marks, your GPS, your own memory, it's already begun to fold back on itself. By day 2, none of them had any idea that they were no longer walking through the desert. They were walking into something else entirely. Daylight turns everything into a mirror in the maze, Ranger Reese once said. But night just waits. You're the only sound. And if the wind stops, let me tell you, start counting. That night, Jessica drew the first of her canyon sketches under a headlamp. What she drew didn't match where they stopped. Too many ledges. One shadow stretched too long. She added a note at the bottom. Felt like someone else had just left. No footprints but theirs. No sign of animals. No bones. Not even distant howling. Silence, in deserts, is normal. But total silence, they learned, feels like being watched by something that isn't breathing. Soft pause. Narrator lowers voice slightly in the camp journal. Wren wrote 3 words in the margins before closing it that night. Just 3. A line like a headline. Paul lost count. They didn't know what he'd been counting. And neither, it seemed, did Paul. They would wake to a route that no longer aligned with their maps, and a spiral of stone that hadn't been there yesterday. By morning, the group was already behind schedule. Their first waypoint, a triangular set of boulders just before the split to Shot Canyon, should have been visible from camp by mid-morning. But when they reached the rise where it should have been, all that stood were 3 low, squat mesas they didn't recognize. Ivan double-checked his GPS. The terrain didn't match. They were showing as northeast, but the shadows said west. He told the group it was probably an elevation misreading. Stone does funny things with signal, he said. No one argued. But Paul was quiet. He kept glancing back the way they'd come, like he was trying to redraw an internal line in his head. Wren noted the moment in her mini-tape recorder just before lunch. Something subtle is shifting. Not wrong. Just unsettling. I kept thinking I'd seen that same dead pinyon tree. Twice. They didn't stop long. From the sky, a thin wind began to descend. High. Whistling. Bone dry. It came in groans, not gusts. Nothing strong. But also, curiously, it didn't move the shrubs much. If anything, the sound was above them. Like wind passing through something invisible just beyond their eyesight. The counting started that afternoon. Or at least, the forgetting of it. Paul had taken over measuring their pace, calling out the distance every 500 meters. It was a habit he'd picked up from ultra-trail runs. Keep rhythm, regulate time, manage fatigue with even breath and numbers. But halfway through a canyon stretch, Ivan noticed Paul had gone silent. 5, Paul had said. And then nothing. Not a 6. No 7. They stopped a moment later. Paul was frowning, his lips slightly parted. I think I skipped it, he mumbled. Skipped what? Wren asked. He looked confused. I don't know. I was counting like usual. And then there's a gap. Jessica laughed gently. You lost your place. It's easy here. No, he said more firmly. I didn't lose it. It was just gone. They moved on. But something frayed in Paul that afternoon. He walked a little farther behind everyone else. Wren offered him her canteen, and he forgot to unscrew the cap. For the first time, he tripped. His notebook, which he'd been using to track time and direction, had a page ripped out by nightfall. He couldn't remember doing it. That night, camp was set along a dry wash where water had once carved through the canyon floor like a blade. Jessica sat sketching the ridgeline, but it wouldn't hold its form in her hand. Shadows kept changing angles. Her pencil moved too fast, too flat. I drew the sun setting, she said, but somehow it was setting east. Across camp, Ivan unfolded his terrain charts again. The land didn't match. He circled one contour line with dark red pen, twice. There was suddenly too much slope between 2 known points. Either erosion moved 5,000 years faster, or the land's lying to us, he muttered. Wren recorded again, no insects again. No ants even near the chalk stones. No mosquitoes by the stagnant pools. I swear I felt fewer and fewer sounds. Even our steps weren't echoing tonight. There was another note of unease, quiet, but creeping. The piece of red cloth was brought up again. It had been eating at Jessica. I didn't want to say this earlier, she finally said, turning to Ren. But that ribbon? I saw another one. Way back. Maybe a mile out of camp yesterday. Up at the wall. It wasn't the same piece. What do you mean? It was too high. It was tied around a branch way higher than I could reach. Almost like, she trailed off. Like something wanted us to see it, Ren finished. No one spoke for a long moment. The wind had stopped entirely. Ivan finally broke the silence. I don't believe in omens, he said. Then added, but we set this route because it's stable. The land here, geologically, it shouldn't shift. That night, Paul didn't join them for food. He sat facing the canyon's edge, murmuring something under his breath. When Ren pressed her ear near him later, she heard the numbers again. 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 6, always even. Always flat. No rhythm. Not whispered, just stated, as if reciting multiplication tables with no goal in mind. As they zipped into their sleeping bags, Jessica paused. Do you feel like we're walking the same mile, just deeper each time? No one answered. It was easier not to ask questions this deep in. The cold came suddenly around 3 a.m. Not gradual, just a wall of absence, air that went completely limp. Ivan, who'd barely slept, stood and looked out over the canyon floor. The sky wasn't a dome, it looked far too open. Part of it shimmered slightly, as if the stars above them had been redrawn just slightly off pattern. He stepped back, instinctively. In the notebook he would never see again, he wrote one line. Stars don't blink that way. That felt like breathing. By dawn, tension sat on them like humidity. The kind dry deserts shouldn't hold. Paul appeared pale, quiet, stale-breathed. His notebook, always with him, was gone. He claimed he left it under a rock. But when Ivan followed him to the spot, there was no notebook. Only 3 stones, carefully stacked. Paul looked like he might apologize. But he didn't. He just said quietly, I think we're not alone today. Later, Ren would revisit her recordings and write margins next to them. Sides notes. Echoes. Next to the one about the shadows moving eastward, she added, too quiet. The wind is waiting for something. And beneath her second-day log, where Paul had frozen mid-count, she scrawled in pencil, Ranger was right. Counting keeps the trail straight. When you stop, it's not that you're lost. It's that something else starts counting you. By the end of day 2, the group had stopped saying they were off course, because that implied there was still a course to follow. What unsettled them most was the creeping feeling that they were still exactly where they were meant to be, that the trail had not lost them, but found them. They would continue deeper the next morning, until the desert showed them a spiral that hadn't been on any map, or in any story they brought with them. They left at first light. No one needed to say it, but after how the wind had vanished, how the temperatures had dropped without warning, they didn't want to stay in the same place 2 nights in a row. Ivan suggested climbing toward higher ground to chase daylight. It'll help get our bearings back, he said. The others agreed, not because they really believed it, but because continuing to act like hikers made everything feel more explainable. Still, the maps didn't line up. The GPS showed slight shifts in elevation that didn't make sense, like they were moving uphill, but losing altitude at the same time. Ren's voice tape from that morning is quieter than the rest. Breakfast was quick. No one's really eating anymore. Paul's eyes don't seem to track us when he talks. He just keeps saying we need to loop west. But we started west. They walked a dry riverbed for nearly 2 hours before the formation appeared. At first, it looked like discoloration, a faint pale curve of dust over red stone. But as they rounded a flat wall, the full shape revealed itself. A spiral, not one drawn in the dirt, but constructed. Wide and deliberate, rocks laid flat, pale limestone against the dark clay. At its center, a single white boulder, smaller than a stool. All the other stones radiated out from that axis, each one about the size of a fist, its smoothest side turned upward. Ivan stopped first. Something in his face shifted. This shouldn't be here. He crouched to touch one of the stones. It was cool. Too cool. Like it had never been in sunlight. Jessica stood just outside the first ring of stone. She didn't want to go closer. Neither did Paul, who was whispering numbers again beneath his breath. There was no sign of wildlife nearby. No ants. No lizards basking on stone. No beetle trails or scattered seeds on the soil. Just silence. And the spiral? I know this rock, Ivan said quietly. This specific kind, it's quartzite. But there's no quartzite in this sector. Not naturally. Not for miles. Someone moved these? Jessica asked. He didn't answer. It wasn't just the spiral's presence that disturbed them. It was the fact it hadn't been there yesterday. They had passed near this spot, close enough to recognize the nearby ridgeline. Someone would have noticed it. You couldn't miss it. But today, it sat at the mouth of the canyon like it had always belonged there. Ren circled the perimeter, careful not to step on any stone. She took a photo, a single wide-angle shot. When the film was later recovered, it showed the spiral from above. Only, there wasn't supposed to be any elevation looking down from that angle. That afternoon, the spiral was all anyone could think about. The canyon's silence felt heavier. Shadows moved faster than the sun would allow. By early evening, Jessica's sketchbook showed 3 attempts to draw the same formation. Each one was slightly different. In one, she drew the central stone cracked. In another, there were 4 rings instead of 5. She swore the formation had been smaller that afternoon than that morning. Like it's pulling inward, she said. Ivan recorded notes in the camp journal, full of uncertainty. The spiral isn't old. No erosion. Clean edges. Uniform placement. But who would bring this many stones out here? And why? There's no art, no signature. Just pattern. That night, Ren made another voice recording. I saw something red today. More than once. Caught it flashing behind a canyon split. I thought it might be fabric again. Or something waving. But when I turned the corner, there was nothing. Just stone. The air smelled wrong. Like hot metal. As night fell, strange sounds began to rise. Not loud, but impossible to place. A faint trickle, like water, but they hadn't seen water in miles. A soft clicking, different from branches, almost mechanical. It stopped whenever someone tried to follow it. At one point, Paul stood in camp staring down at his feet, barefoot on the stone. Ren looked over and asked what he was doing. He said nothing, but in the dirt near his toes, someone, or something, had started replicating the spiral. Small pebbles, arranged in haphazard rings. Incomplete, Ren whispered to Jessica. What if the spiral isn't supposed to be seen from above? Jessica shook her head. What if it doesn't matter how you see it? What if just seeing it is enough? The wind picked up at exactly midnight, with no warning. For 3 days they'd had near-complete stillness. Dead air. But now, a sudden, low breath rushing through the canyon walls. Short, heavy gusts. Measured cadence. Not random. Not natural. Every 10 seconds, or so, a pulse of wind. Then silence. Then another, as regular as a heartbeat. Paul counted them aloud in the dark. 1, 3, 5, he hissed, his voice a thread of dread. He stopped at 9 and curled deeper into his sleeping roll. Ren later wrote. He didn't say 10, just stared somewhere above us. Eyes wide. In the morning, the spiral was still there. But one stone had changed. It now faced rough side up, the smooth edge buried beneath. When Jessica cautiously lifted it, for a second she looked pale, stricken. Beneath it was a thin cluster of red fibers, tangled into the dust. Almost human hair in texture, but thicker, more brittle. She set the stone back. No one spoke. Maybe it's just someone's art, Ivan said again, but his voice lacked conviction this time. He folded the maps, then unfolded them again. We're circling. The spiral's not the only loop in this place. He drew a wide ring across the chart. A circle. Marked it C27. No such feature existed in the park database. In the late morning, they moved on. No one wanted to speak of the spiral. As they passed the last ridgeline, Ren glanced back only once. In her words, I didn't see the spiral anymore. Just the central stone. Just that one. At the center. Alone, she didn't say it out loud at the time. But she was certain. It was still watching them. By the next turn, the land revealed something older. 3 cairns standing like sentinels, stacked with care, pointing in opposite directions, none of them toward home. The desert changes without ever seeming to move. One step to the left, and a canyon closes behind you. Turn around, and the passage you entered from is hidden in shade, or simply gone. On the 4th morning, Ivan's team passed a familiar rock arch Jessica recognized at first. Bent like a spine, the stone curled low across their route, with a patch of lichen she remembered sketching on the first day. We already came through here, she said. Ivan insisted the GPS said otherwise. They were further west than yesterday. But after repositioning under open sky, the device flickered. The map warped and reset. The terrain outline quivered like water. They climbed a flat ridge for clearer perspective. But the plateau revealed only 3 forks ahead, each nearly identical, each veering in a plausible direction. No signage, no markers. Just scrub brush and the patient silence of carved red stone. Until they saw them, 3 deliberate stone cairns, standing in separate directions. Neither old nor broken. Each one stacked precisely, 4 to 6 stones high. The unsettling part wasn't their age. It was the fact that each cairn pointed down a different path. Ivan frowned, climbed one short ledge for a broader view. His shoulders tightened. These weren't here yesterday. He said it plainly. No one argued. Jessica asked, "Are they trail markers at all?" But she didn't need an answer. Each cairn faced outward, away from the others. No central focal point. No shared direction. All leading away. How do you mark a trail where the signs disagree with themselves? Wren wrote that night. Paul stood by the leftmost cairn. His hand hovered just above the top stone, not quite touching it. "I don't trust these," he said aloud. Then very suddenly, without warning, he knocked one over. For stones clattered down the slope. Everyone stared. Even Paul seemed surprised at what he had done. And then, the wind hit them. Sharp and fast and low, like someone exhaling violently through clenched teeth. It lasted only 2 seconds. Then silence again. But in those seconds, it was oppressive. The kind of gust that makes your ears pop. Like standing too close to a subway as it arrives. Nobody rebuilt the cairn. They just kept walking. That afternoon was the first time their trail markings failed entirely. Jessica had been laying twine lengths every quarter mile, threading them between dried creosote along the trail. She'd used a red spool left over from her library's archive tags. Durable, synthetic. But a few hours in, she turned back to confirm the last marker, and nothing was there. Not cut, not broken, gone, as though it was never tied. Ivan stopped the group. They walked 30 feet back. No twine, not even an impression on the branch where it had been knotted. Jessica unwound another length, tied it around a thorn bush, checked it twice, pointed. There. They walked 10 minutes forward, then paused. When they turned back, the branch was visible, but the twine was gone again. Ivan crouched. "Something's wrong with the light out here," he said quietly. They moved in silence through Dusk Valley as the light faded behind a high bluff. The sun was wide and low, but the canyon walls deepened too quickly into shade, as if the spaces between them were swallowing day. The air took on a strange texture, like heat without warmth. Jessica tried to drink. Her canteen water tasted metallic. Paul wouldn't speak. That night, every sound felt louder in the stillness. Boots unzipping, a sigh, a pencil sliding across paper. But the atmosphere still held its breath. Wren later wrote, "The wind's not gone. It's just listening, like it's moved below the ground." Ivan sat by his map spread for a long time. He kept flipping between the satellite prints and his notes. Nothing lined up. Elevation lines dipped where they should rise. Canyon forks had multiplied. Even the compass was off. North had shifted 7 degrees. At one point, he scrawled a single sentence in the page margin, "Cairns divide." Nothing points out. Later that page would be found in fragments, burned around the edges curled from heat. But not fire, just pressure. Paul didn't sleep that night. He sat upright, knees pulled in, staring into the dark like it might blink back. At some point near midnight, Wren leaned in and heard it again. 2, 4, 6, 8, 8, 8. Always even numbers. Except this time, it was never finishing. Just circling on 8. Over and over, like a scratched vinyl or a signal jammed at the point of return. When Wren asked what he was doing, Paul didn't look up. But he replied, "It's trying to reset me. I keep it away if I count." Who? But he didn't answer. Just stared toward the East Canyon wall, toward a narrow spill of shadow that seemed deeper than it had any right to be. A small animal passed camp that night, or so they thought. A sound like a single pebble clipped from a ledge. Not a bird call, not coyote howls, just something moving across gravel. Light. Soft. Intentional. No one investigated. No one wanted to know what left the sound, but didn't leave tracks the next morning. In her voice memo from that night, Ren asked herself. Did we walk in the wrong direction this morning? Or did the land move while we weren't watching? The last line in Jessica's sketchbook for the day was written over a half-drawn cairn. She drew it crooked, the top stone missing. Below it, she wrote 9 words, 3 markers, 3 choices. Nowhere they pointed felt like out. On the 5th morning, they tried to climb out. But the sky had changed, and the light no longer came from one direction. The spiral beneath them had grown wider. By morning, they could no longer agree on how long they had been out. Ivan still marked each day in his pocket notebook, still tracked sunrise times and water levels, still tried to pin logic down. But time was becoming thin. Paul claimed it was the 6th day. Ren argued it was the 5th. Jessica just said she couldn't remember how long ago they saw the first spiral. No one argued for long. They ascended slowly, climbing toward what Ivan believed was a ridgeline southwest of the Finns, an area that should have given them a path north. But the incline was wrong. It rose gently at first, then abruptly steep, without warning. The light stayed the same as they climbed, low and diffuse, like a storm front without clouds. 3 hours passed, and the ridge never came. They were hiking uphill, but losing altitude. Jessica looked behind them once, just once, and quietly said, "The sun's in front of us." But it was behind us when we started. Ivan checked his compass. It spun once, then settled crooked between northwest and dead center. "This whole place is magnetized," he muttered, though his tone betrayed no confidence. Still up they went. Because down meant going back, and there was no longer a clear back. By midday, the ground shifted from red dirt to bright, pale clay, white and fine and clinging easily to their boots. Almost volcanic in color, but too soft, like ashes packed into footprints. The slope leveled suddenly at a wide, dry basin. In the center of that basin, spanning nearly 40 feet, was something else. A spiral path, not made of stone, not built, worn directly into the earth. A deep, perfect spiral of flattened dust, drawn with a single, continuous groove like it had been traced over and over, not by machine, but by foot, by many feet. It began wide and gentle, then narrowed to a tight, sunken impression at the center where the earth turned darker. Paul fell quiet. He stood looking at it with his mouth slightly open, eyes wide. His hands shook. Jessica turned away and vomited quietly in the brush. "It's wrong," she said. "It's older than it looks." Ren refused to go near it. She stayed behind the ridgeline, breathing shallowly, her hand clutching her chest like something inside her had just pulled sharp. Ivan, ever the scientist, paced the outer edges. He did not enter, but traced its shape with a stick, dragging a line along one outer band. "It's not a symbol. It's a movement pattern," he said. "A directional anchor. The ancients used spirals for ceremony, for orientation. It's not meant to mislead." "So why do I feel sick?" Jessica asked. He didn't reply. Paul kept whispering again and again, "Don't walk the inward path. Not backward. Not forward." They moved on by late afternoon, but none of them could explain which way they'd come. At one point, Jessica stopped, spinning around once, then again, like trying to reorient herself. "There's no," she started, then frowned. "Did we pass that branch twice?" Ren said they hadn't. Ivan thought maybe. Paul just sat down and stared at his hands. That was the first time they noticed the shadows falling the wrong way. The light was coming from the west, but their silhouettes were cast forward. Too long, too precise, and they didn't move when the light did. Jessica took a picture. The photo later found on the SD card showed something odd, 4 shadows, but only 3 heads. One much taller, narrower, bent slightly at the top like it was leaning forward. No one mentioned it at the time, but they all saw it. They camped beneath a slab of overhanging rock that night, a formation that resembled a wide stone tooth. It blocked most of the horizon. Here, the sky began to shift. Not drastically, not in a way film would capture, but they felt it, like the sky had reoriented itself, as if they weren't under it anymore, but beside it. The stars arranged themselves where they shouldn't be. The North Star pulsed faintly, off by several degrees. Jessica whispered to no one, "We lost the ceiling." That night, Paul refused his sleeping bag. He sat curled beneath a bare patch of sky, his lips moving nonstop. Ren sat nearby, listening. 2, 4, 6. It was different this time. Slower. Compelled. Then near whisper. The spiral's meant to pull you in. But what's at the center doesn't sleep. She asked him what that meant. He just stared into the earth and said, it stops you when you try to leave. So you leave your thoughts instead. At around 3:30 a.m., Ivan opened his eyes to darkness that felt strange. Not black, not starlit, just absence. A texture to the dark, like velvet, suspended over his face. Shapes moved in it, faint, but echoing, like hands through silk. His notes the next morning didn't mention it directly. Only a single half-line, unfinished. The sky turned wrong. I don't know if. Then the pen line trailed off. Jessica's drawing the next day wasn't of canyons or cairns. She sketched a hollow spiral, unbroken, surrounded by a ring of what looked like human figures, drawn not standing around it, but walking into it. 30-some figures. And the last one in the line? Only half was drawn. Faint. Fading. Like it had only halfway arrived, or hadn't come back out. They walked again at dawn. The landscape had changed slightly overnight. A stone arch now bent lower. A drain wash traced further up the slope. The wind murmured from deep, sharp angles. They didn't speak for an hour. Birds did not return. The insects had entirely vanished. Even flies, even dust motes, gone. All that remained was the spiral's impression and the knowledge that it had been waiting. Not for them specifically, just for someone. Anyone. To count forward until something else could count back. I think, Ivan muttered once under his breath, there's no path that leads out. Only paths that lead in. Deeper, just slower. He pointed toward a ridge where the sky broke open in dull yellow light. We try the next climb. There has to be perspective. And elevation means radio range. But Paul just stared into the dust and began to dig shallowly with one hand. He found another stone. Pale. Warm. As if it had been held. He didn't lift it. He just placed it beside his foot. Later, only one object would ever be found. No people. No bodies. Just a compass. Warped and half-buried, underbalanced stones no one ever admitted to building. Weeks passed. May rose into June like a slow breath. Desert storms rolled through the plateaus. Flash floods swept the washes. The maze, always silent, always patient, said nothing. No one returned from Ivan Keller's group. They were expected back by May 6th. That was the date scratched on a permit, logged in the ranger's record book, and left written on Ivan's dashboard note. But no one flagged concern until May 11th, when a local climbing guide noticed their car hadn't moved. Sun-faded maps still sat behind the windshield. 2 half-filled water bottles in the back seat had buckled from heat. The paper inside the glove box had curled. By the time the official search began, the region had undergone 3 days of wind strong enough to erase tracks. The National Park Service sent in drones and 2 trained cadaver dogs. They found nothing. No signal flares had been activated. The last GPS ping, bounced faintly off a satellite on April 20th, placed them somewhere just south of the dollhouse overlook. But that was over 10 miles from where their planned route should have ended. 3 weeks after the search began, a single item was recovered, Ivan's compass. It was discovered by a ranger named Tasha Elwin, stacked beneath a loose cairn no more than 12 inches high. Far too small to notice unless you were already standing in its shadow. The compass was lying on its side. The metal distorted. The needle posted northeast, even when rotated. Tasha lifted it gently, turned it over. The back was scratched, but not randomly. One word had been etched into the steel, as if carved by nail. Just one word. 7. The significance of 7 was never logged in the search record. Tasha didn't tell her supervisor until days later, and even then, she couldn't explain what felt awful about it. She just said, it was like it was the wrong number. Wrong for this. The compass went into evidence. It never worked again. The dogs refused to track scent past a certain alcove near the ridge. Instead, they paced, circled, sat down, and faced the same spot in the wall. Stared fixed for minutes. Then whined. The rock face they stared at was smooth. No openings. Just windblown. Just quiet. 3 aerial photos taken during the search revealed a curious anomaly. In one snapshot, taken around 6:15 p.m. on May 22nd, a tiny spiral path could be seen carved into the clay floor of a basin, measuring about 30 feet in width. By sunrise the next day, another shot showed the same location. The spiral was gone. Not eroded, not washed out. Gone. Near the end of June, the Park Service contacted independent consultants, terrain analysts, a search and rescue logistics team, and 2 folklore researchers from a desert anthropology focus group at Southern Utah University. One of them, Karina Vale, was a cautious academic, not prone to conjecture. But after reviewing the journals, the maps, and the photographs, she submitted a private note to the lead ranger commander. It read, "The elements of orientation appear deliberately undermined. Symbolic systems are also involved, not merely navigational failure. The path may function spatially within folklore logic, not forensic logic." She was not invited back, but her phrase stuck with one of the coordinators. Folklore logic. An unofficial report came in from a local guide a few months later, a name left off the formal log sheet. He'd been hiking with a private client, avoiding the deeper western canyons altogether, when they heard something low and unexpected. Counting. Off in the distance, beyond 2 slots in a collapsed wash. Even and steady. Not someone calling out, the guide said. Just statement counting. No urgency. Not for help. Like listing things. He didn't investigate. He turned around. Later that season, a piece of fiber, reddish cloth, sun-faded and torn, was discovered fluttering from the upper branches of a stone birch. Rangers who responded had no ladder, no climbing gear. No one knew how it got 30 feet high on a wind-still day. The cloth was removed. It had no decay. Odd for exposure. It felt placed. Fresh. The ranger who removed it claimed later, "I didn't want to hold it. It felt like it had intent." The local Ute Nation was contacted for historical consultation. One elder, Calso Redbird, agreed to review some of the maps. Quiet, formal. He did not look long. After 30 minutes, he asked a simple question. Did they count aloud? The ranger team looked at him, puzzled. What? He nodded once, said nothing else. Then, under his breath, "If you stop counting, the land counts you. And not always just once." That was all he said before politely excusing himself. Later, his words were quietly written by hand in the ranger station log, not as an entry, but on the inside of the back cover. Small script, almost ashamed of itself. The land doesn't always take people. Sometimes it keeps them. Sometimes it waits. By autumn, the official search had closed. No bodies. No gear. No pages. No packs. No photos recovered that could determine exact location. Just a digital camera, weather-damaged, found near a wall of stacked stones. Still operational, but corrupted. 1,300 blurry images. Out of all of them, only 2 were even remotely identifiable. One showed a pale spiral path, from above, just barely captured before the photo blackened at the edges. The other was close up, just one thing, blown slightly out of focus. A fabric thread, fluttering sideways, blurred by wind. Deep red. Almost alive. In time, the story quieted. The weather took back the prints. The newspaper left the headlines behind. People went back to the maze. Most came out. Some didn't. Sometimes a trail camera would flash, triggered by nothing. Sometimes, counting was heard faintly on the static of long-range ranger radios. But only in even numbers. Always even. What was recovered was not the hikers. What was left behind was only what the land permitted. Travelers would return in the years after. Some felt watched. Some felt guided. Others heard numbers in their heads, not their ears. What they didn't know was that the land was still counting, and it never loses track of those it counted twice. After the recovery teams left, something remained in the canyons. Not a presence. Not a ghost. Just the sense that a pattern had opened and didn't close. Word traveled quietly. First among park staff, then through forums, pilots, land guides. Not official. Not written. But understood. That fall, a ranger on solo patrol reported hearing repetitions of even numbers, soft, almost accidental, coming from a narrow side canyon. He wrote, "Could have been echo. Could have been wind. But I stopped walking." Whatever it was counted further than I had walked. When asked for clarification, he wouldn't elaborate. He left the NPS region 3 months later. In 2003, a pair of brothers from Nevada took a weekend trip into the lower maze, camped near land of standing rocks. They planned for 3 nights. They returned after 1. Interviewed separately, their stories aligned too closely for coincidence. "She was crouched in the rocks," one said, "wearing something red. head tilted, still like a lizard. "We thought someone was hurt," said the other. We called out. She didn't move. We turned the bend, and there was no one there. But the dirt was smoothed, like she'd been sitting there a while. Neither brother has visited Utah since. More hikers began reporting small, identical experiences. Not alarming, but cumulative. Seeing the same branch twice in opposite valleys. Maps that showed impossible distances between known landmarks. Twine trail markers disappearing within minutes. GPS coordinates repeating in areas already passed. And the most memorable report, a young archaeologist, camping alone, reported hearing what she described as a distant classroom, children practicing multiplication tables. But fading into earth the closer I tried to record it. She lifted her phone to document it. Only static. Then silence. The next morning, her compass wouldn't stop trembling. Her hands shook too, hours after she'd left the area. Not all who heard the counting reported fear. Some described a feeling of deep quiet. Not peace, exactly, but familiarity. Like something long buried still knew its own name. In 2004, a graduate student embedded with the Southern Utah Geological Survey visited the area to investigate natural compasses in the rock. His team recorded 4 degrees of magnetic distortion across 3 sectors, a complete signal block in one unnamed box canyon, intermittent static when someone said the word out. He refused to return the following season. When pressed, he only said, every compass felt like it wanted to point somewhere else. His research was filed, never published. Locals, old ones, began to use certain phrases again. Not loud, not often, but more than before. Don't walk loops in the maze. You won't know when you're back at the beginning. Another, it don't lose people. It remembers where it put M. And this one, heard only once, murmured at a gas station in Hanksville by a Navajo elder to a passing backpacker. The spiral opens in and closes out. If you step the order wrong, it knows you. In the park itself, something quieter began to change. Rangers no longer placed trail cairns in single stacks. They placed them in 3s, or not at all. Off record, one ranger admitted, people follow in loops. They don't know it. So we use 3s to break the cycle. One marker reaffirms, 3 draw the eye away. Why this worked, she didn't explain. Only that it did, usually. In the summer of 2005, a wilderness photographer took aerial shots of the maze from a charter plane. Every 10th frame, his lens fogged. In one image, far along an untrailed basin, a barely visible spiral path appears again. Only 11 feet wide, seen only from that height. He never noticed it in the moment. But in the final slide, tucked into the corner of the frame, a dot of red. No shape, no shadow, just color, right at the spiral's center. In 2006, a final urgent entry appears at the bottom of a maintenance logbook housed at Hans Flat Ranger Station. The handwriting doesn't match any registered ranger. No indication who wrote it. Just 4 lines, annotated in the blank margin after an oil change report. If you hear numbers aloud, stop walking. Never count backward near standing stones. If you see a red marker, do not mark it again. The land is done waiting. The page ends. That same year, a red fabric triangle was found nailed into a sheer stone cliff 20 feet above the canyon floor. No ladder could reach it. No drone logs showed movement near the spot. The nail was rustless, new, commercial steel. The fabric? Unweathered. No decay. No scent. Hung like a flag left by something that doesn't measure years like we do. Rangers removed it. 3 weeks later, a different red square appeared. On another ledge, 3 valleys away. Rangers did not remove it. People still walk the maze. And most come back. Some feel something shift. A trail missing a bend they remembered. A shadow that moved too soon. A sound like numbers arriving from beneath their feet. They don't mention it. Not right away. They wait until they cross the last sandstone lip out toward Hans Flat. Until there's power lines in the distance again, or dust on their windshield. And then it comes out. One said, it was like being watched by something that hadn't moved in a long time. Like it finally noticed us walking the wrong way. Or another, it wasn't hungry. It wasn't evil. It was just waiting to know who drew the spiral wrong. The phrase most remembered by rangers is simple, ominous. It comes from an internal incident report after another pair of hikers failed to return on time, only to appear unharmed, one canyon over, with no memory of having crossed into it. The reporting ranger simply wrote, "I believe the maze counted them twice," and decided to give one back. Not both, just one. Soft fade, because when the maze remembers you, you're not missing. You're just unreturned. This spiral doesn't vanish. It fades, until you're no longer sure if you walked past it or into it. Even now, the maze keeps its silence. No statements, no answers, only sandstone rising like memory and shadows that lengthen just a little too early. Time has passed. The hikers are a line item in a federal archive. Their case closed. Their names folded beneath years of silt and blown ash. But the spiral remains. Not always in the same place. Not even always fully formed. But it's there. Sometimes just a suggestion flattened into dust, wiped away by morning. Sometimes a perfect ring of stone, gone the next moment. Because the spiral, like the desert, doesn't need to stay. It only needs to be seen. At Hans Flat Ranger Station, visitors still come through. Some with questions, some with maps, some just curious why there are so few trails into the southern quarters. The rangers give what they can. Water, advice, a story now and then. But on one wall, nailed quietly with no label, is a weather-stained wooden plaque. No logo, no stamp. It simply reads, "Some places forget you. Some remember too much." Every now and then, someone new finds it. They smile, take a photo, maybe post it online. A local curiosity, a bit of desert poetry. But they don't know whose handwriting it is. No one does. It wasn't logged, wasn't ordered, wasn't authorized, but it's never been removed. In 2007, a notebook was found wedged deep in the crevice of a ruined ledge 2 canyons north of Chimney Rock. Its red plastic cover had faded to pink. The pages curled in dry waves, still intact. Inside, Ivan Keller's handwriting. Sparse in places. Clipped. The final page was written in pencil. Only one entry. If you see the spiral, stop. Count backward in even numbers. Do not open your eyes until the wind returns. No one knows what that means. But something about it, the weight of it, stays with everyone who reads it. Because it doesn't sound like a warning. It sounds like a set of instructions. The notebook was logged, scanned, and quietly set aside in park archives. It's not on display. Rangers don't bring it up. They know what happened. What went above them? What went beneath? Most lost hikers are found. Eventually. By drone. Or ranger. Or storms that reveal what time hides. But not this time. No gear was ever retrieved. No scrap. No scent. Just dust that rearranged itself too quickly to settle into any one truth. Studies have stopped. No further academic expeditions have returned since 2008. When asked for comment, a wilderness researcher who once spent a full summer mapping the upper maze simply said, "We map using logic. This place doesn't function on logic. It functions on attention. And once it has yours, you can't be sure if you're walking the trail, or if the trail is walking you." Tourists still come. Not many. Some wander too far, sure they're following their devices. One group in 2012 returned with photographs they couldn't place. Images taken of rock outcroppings they never remembered passing through. One photo showed a shadow that didn't match the group. They deleted them without looking deeper. It's easier that way. Better to forget. Unless you were counted. Even now, every few years, a story appears. Buried in Reddit threads. Old backpacking forums. Oral histories taped by graduate students who don't fully know what they've collected. Just fragments. We hiked in a loop that shouldn't exist. Came back to our footprints facing us. My GPS said we were at 5,000 feet. 10 seconds later, 2,300. All three of us saw the red ribbon. None of us pointed at it. We just pretended it wasn't there. One chilling comment under an uncaptioned spiral photo reads, "There was someone standing at the center. But every time I looked, they were mid-step. Never arriving." These aren't evidence. They're echoes. And if there's one thing the maze has taught us again and again, it's this. Evidence disappears. Stories survive. There's a legend now, one told by staff who've worked the park long enough to speak off the record. They say if you find the spiral, and you enter it, even just a footstep, you have to do one thing before you leave. Not a chant, not a gesture, something simple. You count, out loud, in even numbers. 2, 4, 6. And if you lose your place, stop, turn around, Walk back exactly how you came. Don't rush. Don't blink. And whatever you do, don't count backward. They say if you do, the spiral listens. It doesn't like mistakes. It doesn't forgive noise. And if it starts counting you, you won't know until it's already reached your name. The maze holds no grudge and no gift. It doesn't lure, doesn't punish. It simply remembers. When you enter, you are observed. If you pass like a leaf on the canyon floor, light, meaningless, free, it lets you wander out again. But if you linger, if you second-guess your direction, or build your own spiral, or pause too long in a place you feel isn't yours, it will remember you. And once remembered, you are not lost. You are kept. A spiral was recently spotted again, north of the Fins. Briefly, by the time the ranger arrived to investigate, only a single stone remained, perfectly flat, with a smooth red thread stuck to its underside. The ranger wrote nothing. He picked up the stone, held it for exactly 8 seconds, then, carefully, placed it back the way he found it, and walked away, without counting. The desert does not take what it is not first offered, but once given, it does not return it lightly. Some trails guide you home. Some simply guide you deeper inward, until you vanish like a number never spoken on a path made only of silence. That concludes Vanished in Canyonlands, the maze that keeps people. If that gave you chills, like the video, share it with someone who sleeps with the lights off, and hit subscribe, or the next photo might have you in it. Tap the bell. The next story drops soon.